have dyslexia, that every classroom in the state has a child with dyslexia in it. I think that was the most startling fact to me and the most disturbing one. According, the last fact under about dyslexia, according to the National Institute of Health Research, 80% of students placed in special education for a learning disability have dyslexia. If you flip to the second page, I gathered some data from the Department of Education, from DESE. And the graph, the first one under English Language Arts Proficiency, it shows that for students with learning disabilities, 9 out of 10 of those students are not proficient in English language arts. So what we're doing isn't working. 90% of the kids are failing to be proficient readers. And I'm here to share my story. I was the mother of one of those kids. In 3rd grade, my son was failing to read. I came here to share what it's like for him, what it was like for him, and what it was like for us. It was a very distressing situation. And that was my son, Alex, and he was actually, that was between 3rd and 4th grade. And he's, like many kids with dyslexia, bright, very athletic, outgoing, energetic, but he didn't always look like that. On school days, after school, when he was trying to tackle his homework, his expression was far from a smile. And our whole family, my husband and I would spend hours trying to help him with his homework. His grades started fluctuating depending on how much we could support him. From kindergarten on, we noticed small things. Like in kindergarten, we noticed that he was having trouble learning the alphabet. He was not always associating the right sounds with the right letter. He got referred to summer school, but the public school system sent him out and said everything's fine. And I think one interesting fact about kids with dyslexia is that since dyslexic children are typically very bright, their patterns of learning can often be very confusing, leading to a misdiagnosis or a failure to accurately diagnose at all. I think my son got sent out of summer school in kindergarten, and we were told everything was fine because he was memorizing words. He had no phonetic skills at all. But what he could do, because he was bright, is he could memorize is and was and cat and dog. And when he was given a book like the Bob books with, Dick and Jane, he might know 4 of the words, and he could look at the picture and guess what the other 3 were. So he got passed on year after year. And if you click, these are the sorts of things that by 3rd and 4th grade Alex was saying. He was saying things like, I hate school. I'm not smart. I think one of the worst things he said is he came to me and he said, Mom, I just want to be normal. He knew that kids were passing him up. He knew that he couldn't keep up with kids in class. And, eventually he stopped wanting to go to school. I think what was keeping him hanging in there was the fact that he had a lot of friends and he enjoyed sports. But, he was detached in class. And if you click again, we had the distress as parents, the worry. Alex had the distress, but his teachers did too. They're our partners in educating our son. And, we were hearing things like Alex is struggling to focus in class. He looks disconnected. He's not always finishing his homework. He gets an A on one test, he gets an F on the next. We knew as parents that was because maybe that week we could help him study and the next week we couldn't. So they were very concerned by 4th grade. And honestly, because he was looking disconnected and like he was having trouble focusing, and like he would read a passage, and it was as if we'd read a passage and he'd answer a question, and at the end it was as if he hadn't read it. And we'd ask him a question, and he wouldn't be able to answer, and we thought, we just read that passage. How could you not? But what we know now is he couldn't answer the question because he was working so hard to read. He didn't hear the story. He couldn't. It was so much work to read, you're not hearing it. So, Alex's teachers were struggling too, and we were fortunate to land in the office of a clinician that could accurately diagnose him. And we feel so fortunate because we know that there are thousands and thousands of kids in the state that don't get an accurate diagnosis. But the clinician, told us that Alex's learning disabilities are significant and that it's unlikely he'd be successful in school without significant individual intervention. So the first thing I did is picked up the phone and I called the school district and I said, we need help. I need to get an evaluation for special education. And unfortunately, what I heard on the other end of the line, actually the first thing someone told me was, just because your son has dyslexia doesn't mean we're going to help him. And time and again, I got feedback, dyslexia isn't a covered disability. Dyslexia is a medical diagnosis, not an educational diagnosis. We've had a lot of discouragement. And despite that, we went ahead and filled out a packet requesting an evaluation. And this is my son's educational records. And at the time in 2010, it was about half the size. And it had a psychiatric evaluation, it had a neuropsych eval, it had teacher's records, our records, lots of data showing that he was having problems. In May of 2010, from the school district, we got back this form letter, and the form letter said, the Joint Review Committee has reviewed information about Alex and determined that a special education evaluation is not warranted. Despite all this information, all the converging data showing that he had a problem and was failing at school, they refused to even evaluate our son. And I think at the heart of that was sort of the dysfunction in schools. There's a failure to address and acknowledge that dyslexia is a problem, and a failure to acknowledge that there are effective treatments for dyslexia, and that those treatments can be done in public schools. So I think that was at the heart of why we failed to get what we needed in the public school system. And since I said, I think teachers and parents were in partnership. I sat in an IEP meeting. Eventually, we did get evaluated, but I sat in an IEP meeting with teachers and language pathologists, and I looked in their eyes and I thought, I know these people want to help my child. They're passionate, they care. They didn't have the tools. I realized at that point they don't have the tools, they don't have the training, and they're being told that they shouldn't be treating dyslexia. So I think the problem, what my husband and I learned, is that the problems are the laws, and we need to do something about that. So that's why we're here talking to you as legislators. And Representative Scharnhorst, I want to thank you for all your work on this law. It's commendable. And Alex, my son, I worked trying to get the school district to do something. I left no stone unturned. I even called the U.S. Department of Education trying to get help. In the end, the school district was going to do nothing, and we were left to pay privately for his intervention. The good news is that Alex is doing well now. He, for the past 4 years, we've been paying for private interventions. We had to keep him in a private school. We had a language pathologist come in 3 times a week and do an Orton-Gillingham-based program. You were asking about what kind of interventions are effective, and actually the good news is there's research that shows that there are very effective interventions for kids with dyslexia. These kids can learn to read, but it has to be done in a very specific manner. It's not an easy path. My son has worked so hard. But basically what he's had to do, there was a curriculum that was used. He started at book 1, lesson 1, and this year he's due to finish book 8, lesson 12. There were with comprehension, there was a research-based program called Visualizing and Verbalizing that he did. So every child's unique, I agree, so there's not one size fits all. An Orton-Gillingham approach has been proven to work well and be effective for kids with dyslexia. There's a variety of choices. But, the good news, my message, things can be done. They're effective programs. But right now, parents are having to shell out a lot of money. And as a parent, we've been fortunate we've been able to pay for that. But we've spent over $60,000 trying to remediate him. And we know not every family can do that. We struggle to do it. We've accumulated debt, and we couldn't just walk away with Alex doing well and know we were leaving behind a wake of kids that, didn't land in the right practitioner's office, whose family didn't get the right diagnosis, whose family don't have the resources to do it privately. So that's why I'm here, to ask you guys to support this bill, because parents today need help getting reimbursement, getting scholarships for their kids to go to these programs. In St. Louis, that's where I'm from, there are schools that do a very good job that specialize in helping kids with dyslexia. Kids can stay at the school that they're already in and have tutors come in, language pathologists, academic language therapists. They can come in and do these Orton-Gillingham programs with them where they're already at in the school they're in, like my son. So there's very effective programs. And, the one thing, I called Dusty in the end, and they actually said to me, and this was the person that really was trying to help me, she said, Mrs. Understall, you might just need to let loose of that word. And she was referring to dyslexia as if I just stopped talking about it, if I just let go of that word, everything would be fine. And this was a well-meaning person. I think she felt for me. But I thought, that's no solution. This word needs to come out in the open, and there needs to be opportunities for kids like my son to get what they need. That was Alex in 2012. We ended up filing due process eventually. That's how he eventually became identified and qualified for an IEP. The sad thing is that they had this entire record in 2012. We settled in 2013. They still would not qualify him as having a specific learning disability. They qualified him under other health impairment as having ADHD. So it's as if dyslexia is a dirty word in public schools right now. And I hope that this will begin the process to change that we can come out in the open, get parents immediate relief so that these kids, can you click one more? So that's my son today. And, I'm here to ask you, please don't wait more than a year. 4 years to me doesn't seem like that long, but if you look at the picture, the first picture to the last picture, he went from a young boy to a young man. If we wait and give time, we're going to pass this up. As a parent, co-founder of Decoding Dyslexia, I heard from a grown man the other day, Daniel, and he is not able to function. He got passed through the school system. He has dyslexia. He works at night as a janitor. He said he's afraid to even work during the day because he has so much anxiety because of his disability. So I want to put an end to people like Daniel having to live with their disability when there are effective interventions. So that's all. Thanks for your patience with me.
Thank you so much. Thank you for coming forth. Thank you for opening up your life to all of us, so that we can understand where Daniel is. And what a handsome young man. I would ask you, in the case of autism, there is a window of opportunity for after diagnosis that we can have a comprehensive or long-ranging effect on the brain of that child. Is that the case in dyslexia, or can intervention come at any point along the continuum that we can have an effect? I'm hoping that's what it is.
Well, actually, the earlier the intervention, the better the effect. So catching someone, that's why using the CHOP as a screening tool is really important, to catch these kids in kindergarten and first grade. I wish when, my son's kindergarten teacher knew he was having problems. I wish he had had a screening at that point and we could have done the intervention. He would have learned to read when everyone else was learning to read. But that's not what happened for us. So that would have been ideal. And
right.
You do get better results when that happens. Yes, but you can't give up on the kids that that get past that point, because my son's an example. He didn't start until the summer between 4th and 5th grade. Unfortunately, he's had to learn to read as everyone, like we pulled him out of Spanish class, so he's not getting a foreign language, and he misses one of his electives. So he's having to learn to read during those times, and as class is progressing, and we've provided tutors to help him sort of keep up with his class. That's not the best path, not the best way to do it, but it can still be done. And my gosh, I have, a young man that's getting ready to go to high school that I don't have to help him with his homework at night anymore. He's like, Mom, leave me alone.
Right.
He's making honor roll.
Be sure to impress upon him the fact that there is no normal.
Right.
That does not exist. It's like common sense at the Capitol. It's called rare sense. But let him know that we're all affected by something in one way or another, and he's just another guy on his way to his success. So let him know that. Let him know that. Don't be holding yourself up using someone else's ruler. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you.
Representative
To inquire, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for coming today. I'm a mother of 2 small children myself, and I know how difficult it can be when you know that your child needs something and you know that they have the right to have that need filled, and you're banging your head against the wall.
Yeah.
Do you think, and I'm asking you because you clearly have way more experience in this than I do, especially with a government agency, do you feel like the folks at DESE were, sounded like they were ignorant of some of the issues associated with dyslexia, that perhaps they didn't have perhaps the bureaucracy was such that they didn't have the tools available to help your son, or was there also a tinge of maliciousness? Or
I don't think there was maliciousness. You know, honestly, I think that, you know, all the people I encountered from the special school district, you know, I think good intentions were always there. I think there's ignorance. You know, just like myself, when my son got the diagnosis, I knew nothing. And, you know, I do think in some ways, you know, with, I'm sure everyone's on the education committee, you know, you're all on the education committee and are familiar with IDEA. You know, dyslexia is listed as an example of a specific learning disability. But with dyslexia, we have a crisis with child crime. These children aren't being identified. I don't know where, like, you know, my son also has ADHD, so ADHD is listed as an example of another health impairment. I can sit down in a public school and talk about ADHD all day. I cannot sit down and talk about dyslexia.
Well, and I wonder if because he didn't fit in one of the predetermined boxes that, okay, if the child has this particular diagnosis, this flow chart tells me how to provide him the services, and you're perhaps the pioneer in creating that flow chart, and they just didn't have a place to put him that would make sense for him.
I think the laws are the enemy right now. I think we're all sort of a victim of the laws not being as clear as they could be. And, you know, right now it's really no one's fault. You know, I really do believe that. I think DESE has good intentions. Like I said, I think the woman really had compassion for me and just really wanted to see that, you know, she wanted me to feel better, to be honest. So, you know, I do think there's a lot of problems with knowledge about it. But at the same time, DESE's aware of the problem. They know that kids with dyslexia aren't being identified, and they're not going out to school districts and doing anything about it. They're not. There's no compliance action taking place where they're going out and saying, okay, there's a child coming in saying they have dyslexia. Why aren't they being identified under SLD? You know, because that's where the child should be identified.
Well, I want to applaud you and your efforts, and never giving up for your son. Your efforts clearly will help more than just your son, and I want to thank you for your willingness to keep going at it. So thank you for your testimony today as well.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions from the family? All right. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you very much.
Do we have any other witnesses in favor of the bill? All right. How many do we have? Just raise your hand. Because we're going to get short of time if we don't kind of shorten it a little bit.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Edwards, and I'm from Springfield, Missouri. I'm the constituent Eric mentioned. About 3 months ago, my husband and I met with Eric to discuss a very similar issue that Kelly had with her son. We have a 9-year-old daughter who was struggling to learn how to read. And 3 years ago, she was a very bright, vivacious child, sat in the front of her kindergarten class, first one to raise her hand, very excited to go to school. About halfway through the year, on Sunday night, she started bringing me the thermometer and would ask me to take her temperature and saying that she was sick and couldn't attend class the next day. So I knew something was going on. I went to meet with her teacher, and she said that she really did notice something, that Annie might have a working memory issue, because she could read a few words on a page. You turn the page, she couldn't recognize those same words. So, but the teacher she didn't have any experience with that. She didn't know what to call it. She was so well-meaning, such a great teacher, did a lot of research, couldn't figure it out. So my husband is in healthcare, and that's kind of our fallback, so we decided to go and have some testing done. And we discovered that she had dyslexia. We were referred to a neuropediatric psychologist. There's one in our area that is qualified to give the diagnosis of dyslexia, which was astounding. He was very difficult to get into because being the only one available He had quite a long waiting list. But after we got the diagnosis, what really astounded me is that it really did not equate to services in public schools, because even though you have this medical diagnosis, the treatment is not medical. The treatment is educational. Yet the school system will say, well, that's not an educational diagnosis. So it's a huge catch-22 when you go trying to get services for your child. And then what we also quickly found out was that they didn't have the appropriate remediation available in public schools. So our options then were to find a private tutor. And tutoring is great because it is available, and there is proper remediation, the Orton-Gillingham method that Kelly mentioned earlier. There are several different programs based on that method, but it is it's really well regarded in terms of the treatment and effectiveness of dyslexia. And so we have a tutor, and I would say we spend roughly $500 a month in tutoring. And additionally, so that our daughter can do the things after school that make her feel like a good person and like she's able to do things. We put her in a private school so that she could have that remediation done during the day. Public school would not allow us to provide our own tutor, unfortunately, and since they didn't have their effective remediation for her, we felt that was our only alternative. Her experience has been really good so far. She has improved her reading levels in kindergarten. Or in first grade, she was still below a kindergarten reading level, and she's in third grade now, and she's middle of second grade. She's halfway through her remediation program, and so that is she's on a successful path. It's unfortunate that Missouri Public Schools won't remediate it because 20% of the kids that attend public school are dyslexic. And as Eric showed in that video, with remediation, it's kind of like a stroke victim. With the functional MRI, you can tell that their wiring can be rerouted so that they can learn how to read. When she received the diagnosis, I set a course of discovery about dyslexia and found out a lot of things. One startling statistic that I learned was that dyslexics are 20% of the people, 35% of the entrepreneurs, and 41% of our prisoners are dyslexic. So you kind of see the path, the kids who struggle that get support, the kids who don't. So that was a really startling statistic. I think we are at a point right now with this bill that we can kind of change the course for some of those kids to give them opportunities that they really need. The diagnosis that I mentioned earlier is expensive privately. That's one of the great things about this bill, that the CTOP test, the test itself is very inexpensive. It's easily given, and it would earmark the kids that need to go on for their diagnosis. So, a medical diagnosis can run $2,000 or more for a family, and not all insurance plans cover it. My husband has an excellent insurance plan. It wasn't covered. So that is a barrier for some families in even getting the diagnosis itself to know what to do later. So I appreciate you letting us testify today, and I hope that you will support this bill because I think it is really necessary.
Thank you, Representative King.
One brief question. We hear a lot about reading. Does this bleed over into other subjects?
Yes.
Well, I mean, obviously, when you have to read in other subjects, it'll bleed over, but is there specific problems with math?
Yeah, dyslexia is also commonly associated with other neurodiverse conditions. One's called dysgraphia, which is a problem writing. One's called dyscalculia, which is a problem remembering math concepts and math facts. Because it is a processing issue, all those things are associated. Word problems which, kind of are hard for everyone, but specifically for dyslexics, because they're obviously decoding words and then trying to understand those math facts as well. Yeah, good point.
Anyone else? Thank you. Next witness, please.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Frank Flotron. I'm speaking as an individual with dyslexia. All of the horror stories that you have heard happened in my life. Fortunately, my folks moved the sun, the moon, and the stars to help me. The worst thing any of you could ever ask me to do is to stand up and read out loud in public. It just terrifies me beyond imagination. People who are dyslexic think differently, and my wife tells me that every day. But it's true. There's an interesting book called The Gift of Dyslexia, and the analogy they used is that people who are dyslexic think in pictures, in images, rather than others who they describe as thinking in symbols. And if you work on the premise that a picture is worth 1,000 words, a person who is dyslexic can solve certain kinds of problems better, faster, more effectively than others, which gives rise to the statistics that the prior witness quoted. Dyslexics are very effective at things that require a kind of creativity. They are not necessarily very effective in terms of dealing with symbols and using symbolic logic rather than this visual creative logic. My last comment to you is that if you think about it, you've got this disproportionately high percentage of dyslexics who are extraordinarily successful in business and science and, run on down the list, and you have a disproportionately high percentage of them that are very successful in crime. Now, a minor amount of effort on the front end that will help those dyslexics be able to operate properly in the world that we're all expected to operate in is going to improve life for everybody. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Is there anyone else?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Mike Wood, representing the Missouri State Teachers Association, and I can understand how Representative Burleson had an aha moment dealing with this issue, because I kind of had the same thing this fall. We had a number of teachers that contacted us this fall dealing with their frustration of dealing with students with dyslexia. And because they know students that probably have it have never been officially diagnosed with it, because there's no educational definition for dyslexia, because if you heard from these wonderful parents, it becomes a medical diagnosis. Their frustration is they come out of school not being able to understand how to effectively teach these children. Teachers that have been in the classroom, there's not effective professional development in order to help with that. And their frustration really, I think, I try to break things down to the simplest common denominator is, this is a good first step, but until we actually get an educational diagnosis of this, then we can get the IEP, and that will drive the instruction and the professional development and the teacher prep programs, and we can do all of those things that are necessary to help these kids. But I will tell you, the teachers out there are as frustrated as these parents that came before you today with the same thing they ran through. They want to be able to help these kids. They just don't have the tools in the toolbox to be able to do it at this point in time.
Thank you. Any questions for the witness? Thank you so much. Next witness, please.
Chairman, members of the committee, Otto Pajan on behalf of Missouri NEA. We'd also like to go on record in support of House Bill 1614. I think my aha moment might have been last year with a daughter who is very well tested and happens not to have dyslexia, but she's one of the most well-studied folks in our family for sure, and she has problems and frustrations, and we've had frustrations that feel very similar to this. And we are very sympathetic to the plight of both the parents and our members in dealing with these situations. We think this bill is is a small step forward in that direction that'll help improve student success. And we're very much in favor. Be happy to try to answer any questions.
Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. David Jackson, also testifying as an individual today, and also on behalf of my girlfriend, Claire Vatterat, who couldn't be here today. Over the past 6 years, I've been lobbying on education policy, but at the same time, she's been getting her master's degree in special education and runs a learning disability and specialist program in St. Louis. And she specifically is Orton Gillingham trained, and I've seen, as I work on policies down here, I get to hear stories about her coming back and telling me and listening to stories about having kids learn how to read. Specifically, she wanted me to share one story, and I think she's actually watching live, so I'm in trouble if I say this wrong. But she was telling me about a student who this year was at the beginning of the year in 2nd grade and was faking sick to go home. And in the beginning of the year, he didn't want to be in class. He was embarrassed from having to read out loud and didn't get it. Once they found out his dyslexia, and through her Orton Gillingham training, he's now, within the past 4 months, reading the 2nd grade level. So I just want to go on record on support and behalf of her, and if there any questions.
Thank you. Next witness, please.
Kate Costas with the Children's Education Council of Missouri. Just want to go on record in support of this bill.
Thank you. Any questions? Next witness, please.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Luana Gifford with ASC Missouri, we'd like to go on record also.
Thank you.
In support of the bill.
In support of the bill. Anyone else in support of the bill? Thank you. Is there anyone here that is in opposition to the bill? Is there anyone here for informational purposes only? Thank you. Representative Burleson, you have a better title on this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's an honor to represent my district, and I appreciate the committee's thoughtful help on the bill. I really greatly appreciate working with Representative Scharnhorst as we finally craft a great bill. Thank you.
Representative Thompson.
Yes, to inquire. Of course, this is an important issue, as we've all realized. When we talk about education, a lot of it is about resources and how we're going to use our resources. The resources aren't infinite, but how we're going to use our resources. Do you think that this is probably near the top of some of the resources, as we've heard from the teachers groups and things, something that needs to be addressed internally among the schools or
I think so.
statewide?
I think it's no wonder that I believe one of the best school districts in the state, and I wish they were I represented that school district, Nixa Public Schools. I think it's no wonder that they're teaching Orton Gillingham. They're identifying children with dyslexia, and they're providing an Orton Gillingham curriculum for those students. I think it's no wonder that that's the top school in the state.
Well,
so I think that they figured it out, and I would think that if I were a superintendent, I would quickly try to implement this, because it clearly has tremendous success.
So you think a lot of that is school leadership, and where they address issues that are, whenever they're placing what's important to education.
Yeah, and I try to avoid telling school districts what to do. I don't want to do it from the state level. I want to leave local control. I think that this bill goes about providing the resources without directly telling the school districts what to do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Burleson, for bringing this bill forward. I think it's a good bill. I want to thank Representative Schoenhaus for his work on this bill. Well, thank you. We'll now move to House Bill